Now, moving on to the Third Crusade, I'll explain why I skipped the Second Crusade in a second. And we'll talk about the Third Crusade. And there are actually a bunch more crusades besides that, but once you kind of get the story of the most famous crusade, besides the first one, is the Third Crusade, you'll kind of get the narrative as well and kind of understand its importance. So, let's talk about, I'll call it the Last Crusade. By the way, if you haven't seen this movie, shame on you. That's your homework right there. Classic movie with Sean Connery as his dad. Yeah, don't study for the test. Go watch that movie. Just kidding. Alright, so here's the 10-second summary of the Second Crusade. So the Christians, remember, at the end of the First Crusade, had overtaken the city of Jerusalem and killed everybody inside. The Second Crusade goes along the lines of this. The Muslims, led by Saladin, we'll talk about, they go and basically take over the city of Jerusalem, and now the Christians have to go and gain it back from their perspective. So that's basically the Second Crusade in a nutshell. Now, what caused the Third Crusade? And I put the word cause in quotes there, because this doesn't cause it, I would argue, but this is what they believed caused it back then on the Christian side. Is after the Christians had gone and, captured the city of Jerusalem, overall morality began to go on the decline in Europe, and the old timers looked at the young people and said, "Oh, what are you guys doing? What is this?" Some of the examples, they began to go, and it became more common to rip people off. You would go to the market and you'd have hay, and people would sneak stones into the hay, so it would weigh more when you had to go pay for it. They started to make sausages out of like cats and dogs as well. It was common for knights. Knights were supposed to act super chivalrous, but they actually didn't. So all of these things kind of contributed to the idea that morality had gone down, essentially down the toilet. All right, so let's talk about the two leaders and kind of the showdown between the two. Now, on the Muslim side, you have the great Saladin, or Salah al-Din is really his name, which really isn't his name. It's a nickname, but that's not really super important. And Saladin is known not by his people, but by the Christians as the son of the devil. They absolutely hate Saladin. And in order to go and fight against Saladin, the Crusaders go and start what's known as Saladin's tithe, which is where you had to go and basically tithe or pay 1/10 of your income as a tax in order to go and pay for the crusade in order to fight this evil man, this son of the devil, was kind of what the title they gave him. And his opponent was Mr. Richard the Lionheart. So what we're going to be looking at here is the city of Jerusalem, and Richard the Lionheart and Philip II are going to be coming down and ultimately trying to get to the city, and you'll find out if they do. Now there's Mr. Richard the Lionheart. Not really. He was the King of England. He was actually not technically English, he was Norman. And if you kind of understand the difference between the English and the Normans, he was King of England, but he wasn't from the area. He actually hated England, but he's a hero. He's known for just being very strong, healthy, the King of Kings type lion, Lionheart, so he's supposed to be courageous as well. And Richard Lionheart goes all out. What he does, among other things, and besides invoking Saladin's tithe, opening up the prisons and letting all the prisoners go on the crusade. A pretty smart idea, I guess. And going and teaming up with Philip II of France. So they form this odd relationship, just like this lovely couple right here. They form this relationship, even though they didn't exactly get along. They have the common enemy of Saladin. And Philip II is, stands very much as a counterpoint to Richard the Lionheart. Richard the Lionheart says a lot of nasty things about Philip II's sister. And they don't get along super well, but they go and team up. Philip really has no choice. The people in France want him to fight. And Richard the Lionheart also strategically knows he should bring Philip along with him, so England won't be attacked while he's away in France. They go and implement a lot of strict rules because, as we talked about, there's an idea that morality had gone on the decline and needed to be taken care of. So you can pause here and take a look. Some of these are kind of fun. Richard Lionheart is going to go and get very, very close to the city of Jerusalem, spends a couple of years, and when he finally gets down, he can see the city of Jerusalem, and he realizes he's out of troops, he's out of money, he's going to have to go back home and regroup. and he actually signs a treaty with Saladin. Now, these guys had a bit of a bromance, a famous bromance between the two of them. Famously, Richard the Lionheart got sick during a battle, and Saladin actually sent him a fruit basket to help him feel better. And once Richard the Lionheart got knocked off on his horse during the battle, and Saladin gave him a horse so he could continue to fight. So there's a healthy, like, almost respect. And when I say that, people are always very confused. Like, in a modern, warfare, you would never see that. But that's just kind of a belief at a time, is respecting the other military leader. And Richard goes and signs a treaty with Saladin. The treaty with Saladin basically says that the Christians can go and visit the city of Jerusalem if they want to on a religious pilgrimage. That's okay. They pay a little bit of money, go see the holy sites, that's okay. And it keeps the peace for the time being. Richard the Lionheart is going to head back to Europe, try to regather more troops, and Saladin basically says to him, I would rather lose to you than anyone else. So they kind of have like a funny bromance going on. Unfortunately, though, both of them are actually going to die relatively soon after the Third Crusade. Saladin dies very soon after they sign this treaty, due to some form of a fever. And Richard the Lionheart later dies just a few years later, famously from an arrow wound in his neck while fighting in France. So the Third Crusade ends somewhat abruptly, I guess you could say, and the Christians do not go and regain the city of Jerusalem. So of all the Crusades, the Christians only win one. They lose every single other one. They only win the first one. But just to say that they're not important because of that is just simply not true. There's Saladin's tomb. Next time you go to Syria, because I know you go there on family vacations, go check it out, where it looks creepily green in the room. So as we go, essentially what happened was, okay, obviously Jerusalem is going to stay in the Muslims' hands, and then the Christians have their, like, Crusader states, is what they call them, their outposts as they come over from Europe. And as these crusades go on, as time goes on, these Crusader states are going to be lost over the Muslims, right? You think about these areas today, if you know geography a bit, these aren't Christian areas. Okay, these are Muslim areas. But you can see how closely, if you look at this this green and the blue here, how, like, relatively close some of these fortresses are to each other at the time. So there's a lot of trading of culture, etc., etc. So what? What's the long-term impact of the Crusades? One thing, the person who gets the short end of the stick is the Byzantine Empire. They actually get hit by both sides during it. The Latin Crusaders are going to go and even kill their Christian brothers and steal from them along the way when necessary. So the Byzantine Empire is hit from both the Muslims and the Catholic Christians, and that goes back to kind of the whole Catholic Orthodox split that had happened before. So the Byzantine Empire is actually substantially weakened, and that's the extension of Rome. In addition, that really is the true, I would argue, the true beginning of tensions between Christianity and Islam, at least on a larger scale. And both people essentially began to call each other infidel, which means one without faith, which is somewhat ironic because they both believe in God. But let's just ignore that. That word infidel even has a lot of connotations today as well. Okay, let's say what's good that came out of it. Historians have made the argument that when we're getting to the Crusades, getting in a little bit later in the Middle Ages, this helped spur a lot of trade and the development of the Italian city-states. And this development of the Italian city-states eventually led to the Renaissance, is one of the arguments. And then there's also the idea that because of this, both cultures are trading. Usually, when we're talking Middle Ages, it was more Europe had something to gain from Islam than there wasn't much for Europe to give to Islam at the time. But Islam had a lot of culture, language, specifically Greco-Roman knowledge as well, that later got translated back over for the Christians to read. So there's kind of the argument that there's a normal, natural kind of extension of culture, and when there's an extension of culture, there comes up with new ideas, etc. But there definitely is kind of this idea that Muslims and Christians are not going to like each other. And we kind of almost have that base starting point as a result of the Crusades.